Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to ETH Talk, your weekly look at the market in ETH Online. In my opinion, it's actually been a decently quiet week in ETH Online. I guess that CCP is currently working hard on getting everything ready for the expansion that's coming out in a couple of weeks. So there wasn't really anything all too new on the horizon, which means that we can jump straight into the market this week. Let's go there, let's head for some plex and get started at around 35 seconds. Like that. To my surprise, at least a little bit to my surprise, in Jita itself, plex are still down to almost 2.9 million, and if you look at the chart here, we still have a very slow trickle down on the 5-day moving average. But look at where the chart's at, 2,088,880,000 ISK. That is definitely quite a bit of pressure, and it is close to a 1-year low if we would disregard like the first 1.5 months or so. So definitely an 11-month low at the moment. If you take a look at the player-owned trade hubs, it's 2.9 million around for the first sellers, and the buyers are down to 2,850,000 ISK. So you can definitely try to grab a couple of plex for less than 2.9 million at the moment, which has not been possible in quite a while. If you want plex for the longer term, where it is as an investment or so that you're ready to pay your sub later on, I do think that this is a nice time at the moment to grab some of those and put them aside. For the longer term, I don't see any major spikes in the really short term, unless the expansion has that drastic impact that for some reason lots of people all of a sudden come back and want to sub for free. But overall, this is definitely, in my opinion, a nice opportunity at the moment with plex for less than 2.9 million on the buyer side of things. Quite interesting that this keeps going at the moment. There could still be sales ongoing, of course, but I don't really see any major reason why inflation wouldn't take over at any time, basically. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate, which, you know, to me sort of underscores that point that there is still inflation in the game and that a comeback for plex feels almost inevitable, because you can clearly see here that the multiple pilot training certificate did drop down to like 900 million ISK, which was of course very cheap and a 1-year low point. But you can also see that the increase in price now is almost unstoppable, and we're already back at more than 1.13 billion ISK here. So it's practically 1.2 billion for the sellers and a little bit above 1.1 billion for the buyers. So these the decrease in price for multiple pilot training certificates, even on this small market, was not sustainable for very long. We are now inevitably going back up, and I think, you know, sellers at 1.2 billion will see 1.3 billion pretty soon here as well. And so it's a little bit strange that plex is managing to continue a slow downward trend on the 5-day moving average here. Next up, we have the skill extractors, of course very closely tied to plex, and those are again bouncing off of the 330 million mark. You can see that we did so twice before, but yet again a low point for, you could say, the last 10-11 months or so. Probably a small opportunity as well. 326.4 million for the sellers, 321 million for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin. I think, you know, a strong indication that this is sort of a bottom forming at this price range of 330 million. And also slight uptick on today's daily moving average. So I do think that this could all be over pretty soon. If you need plex, if you need some skill extractors, then I do think this is the right time to purchase those that you absolutely need here. Next up, we have the large skill injectors, a little bit flat at less than 800 million though. So you do see that slow trickle pressure, but you also don't notice the massive drop-off that plex has done. Well, massive, all of that is relative, of course, but it's quite noticeable here that we've gone down from almost 3.5 million to 2.9 million for the skill injectors. Let's see here, large skill injectors. We've been much more stable around the 800 million mark in the last couple of months. These are being sold now for 798 million ISK in the player-owned trade hubs. In Jita, we are apparently above. Let's go until we find station. Yeah, at 815 million in the player-owned stations and 782 for the buyers here. A little bit more of a margin opening up, especially compared to the JITA prices. Also a bit more margin between JITA and the player-owned trade hubs, and yet a more stable price despite one of the base materials, the extractors, going down in price pretty sharply here at the tail end. This to me is a very strong indication that there is still a lot of demand for skill points themselves. But what I didn't expect, and that's actually happening right here on these charts, is that they're actually adding stability to the good rather than more volatility. So I always had this theory that you know, plex would just generally inflate up, and then you would have the gambling aspect, the possible extra volatility due to the demand for skill points in the game. And I was expecting wider swings on the injectors compared to plex, compared to the skill extractors. But this time it's the exact opposite. Because of the sales from CCP, there is more volatility in plex and extractors, a lot of downward pressure here. But the demand for skill points is basically keeping the large skill injectors very stable at just under 800 million ISK. For the small skill injector next, we are going, we went down, you could say, to 160 million ISK, but here today's daily average is definitely up a little bit, and we are talking 160 in the player-owned trade hubs, 169 in JITA itself. So again, a pretty wide margin there between sellers in just one jump away and in JITA itself, and then 155 million for the buyers. So there seems to be more margin for the price to move, but again, once we get around that 160 mark, we are going to flatten out here, and I don't really see us go anywhere, just like with the large skill injectors. So here you have the same situation, 799, 798 for the sellers in player-owned trade hubs, going up to 815 in JITA, and the buyers at 782. That should give us some leeway to move, but no, it's actually really stable. I'm a little bit surprised by that stability here. The only positive about this is that if you'd invested in the large scale injectors earlier in the year, you do have something that has basically lost a little bit less than plex at the moment. But you know, for a store of value, that this is great. But I was actually looking at a store of value in plex and something to try as an investment in the skill injectors. It turns out that for now it's the exact opposite that's happening. The daily alpha injectors are, well, basically stabilizing in the 55 to 60 million price range, currently selling for 59 million, and the buyers are at 53 million here. Also a bit of a margin opening up here in these injectors. That's quite interesting, but the chart itself just remains decently stable. Next up, we are moving on to some minerals at 810. Like that, and we'll start with titanium. You may already have seen from the ticker below that we're back up to 5.3 ISK, which is right in the middle of the biggest variations for the last few months here. So we're talking, here we go, and we should definitely go to JITA for that. 532 now for the first seller, 515 for the first buyer. The numbers are starting to go up in supply here, 1.8 billion, another 1.8 billion, another 1.5 billion. But it looks like there is a strong enough demand at the moment for titanium that all of this is getting absorbed. So we're definitely looking at a pretty good price for titanium at the moment. One of the minerals that you could focus on if you're mining in HiSec and you want to sell for a decent amount of ISK. And basically you want to get some decent ISK per hour out of your mining time. Titanium is actually doing decently well. Pyrite, a little bit of a jump up. Okay, when we broke 4 ISK though, and that's interesting. So we went to a 1-year low point of less than 4 ISK on a couple of days. That's when investors came in and started to actually do a bit of purchasing, tried to bring the price back up to almost 4.5 ISK. And so now we are selling for 435. Buyers are coming in at 403. It's definitely still not great if you look at this entire 1-year chart, but it's interesting to see that at least a little bit, you can see that on the volumes here, a little bit of investment buying has started when pyrite went below 4 ISK. So the investors are still out there. It's not a straight line down. There's always people willing to take a gamble when we reach those 1-year lows, but you know, look how quickly we are snapping this back down, how limited the increase in price has been. It does indicate that there's not too much confidence in pyrite going back up. And this is definitely not something you want to focus on for your mining. You're really getting abysmal ISK per hour if you're focusing on pyrite sources. It's just mined too abundantly in nullsec at the moment, next to everything else that they need, so that there is just too much supply of pyrite out there. You can see here 700 million, another billion right here. All of that in a price range of 440 to 435, which is actually a pretty high price in the last couple of months, or compared to the last couple of months. And it's actually a very, very bad price, because titanium, which is more plentiful, is selling for more. You can get more titanium for every hour that you spend mining. You can clearly see that just on the straight volumes that are being brought here, and yet the price per unit is lower for pyrite. A little bit of a crazy situation, but that's what we find ourselves in. Next up, we have Mexilon. Last week we had to give some ground, and we are not stopping, unfortunately. We're basically coming back to an average price for the entire year of a little bit less than 75 ISK. It's 73 for the sellers and 70.60 for the buyers, which is still an okay price, but it's not the 75 to 80 mark, which was a really great price for Mexilon. So a little bit unusual as well to see actually titanium work its way back up, although I think we should also be a bit relative about that. So you can see that Mexilon is basically in the middle of the chart. Titanium worked its way back in the middle of the chart as well. So we are not in super demand territory for nullsec. You know, it's not like they all of a sudden are rushing to build extra really big ships or anything like that, which would create a lot of Mexilon and titanium demand. We are on the average though. It's not like everybody's sleeping there either. Next up, we've got Isogen that is continuing. It's bouncing off of the 30 ISK mark. Again, a 1 year low point here. 31 ISK almost for the sellers, 30.55 ISK for the buyers. Very narrow margin. So I do think that investors, if we would break 30 ISK, which I think is possible, it's just a couple of buy orders, just a few million more Isogen, and the buyers are below that, that we might see another investment spurt, just like with pyrite. But it is all really playing at the bottom. It's very risky, so even if that would happen, I don't expect that will jump to like more than 35 ISK or anything like that, just because, you know, these are so oversupplied. It's quite crazy. Isogen is going for less than half the price of Mexilon, and again, if you're mining both sources, normally you're getting a lot more Mexilon per cubic meter than you're getting Isogen. So this is really quite a reverse situation in these minerals here as well. Next up, we have Noxium that after getting to 325, which also, you know, on investments, you can see that from the volume. After we reach a 1 year low of 300 ISK, you get the investments jumping up to 330, something like that. Now the pressure is back on, so you really can't break out with these minerals at the moment. 315 for the sellers, 301 ISK for the buyers. It's basically going to, any new supply is going to continue to add pressure here. And if we reach 300 ISK again or very close to that, that's when we probably see some more investors. But you must invest in the long term here. You must wait for like really a major nullsec war. Somebody, one of the big entities like the Imperium, that would really deploy in force with capitals, with supers, until we might see some actual destruction and thus some real increase in demand for minerals at the moment. Next up, we have Zydrine that is also, again, continuing to stay in the very low range of 600 to 700 ISK. 681 for the sellers, 675, 676, something like that for the buyers. At least it's stabilized, but it is obviously stabilizing at a 1 year low point here. And now we've got Megasite, same story, stabilizing at the current trade range, which is 674 ISK for the sellers and 648 ISK for the buyers. Very close to one another. It almost looks like the distinction between Megasite and Zydrine is gone with the introduction of moon mining 2.5 systems. I guess that that's sort of normal, because from what I've seen, many of the moon compositions, or either ores for megasite or ores for zydrine. And so if you can put up enough of them in 0.5 systems, it makes sense that anything that would be worth more would just mean more moons being deployed to mine that specific mineral. And so in the end, we are basically going to get rid of any distinction market-wise between megasite and zydrine, because any difference in demand from the market will then be absorbed by just, you know, adding or focusing on a couple more refineries on the moons that produce the actual mineral. And so overall, I think that it is very likely that we will stay very close to one another for these two minerals. And finally, we also have a morphite for a Tech 2 production that is staying quite strong between 9 and 10,000 ISK. Definitely, I would say at the high end of the average at the moment, 9,500 for the sellers, 9,000 for the buyers. I wouldn't be investing here. I would be waiting for a price that is well below 9,000 ISK before I start an investment in morphite again, which has been successful. In the past, I've managed to make a few morphite trades where you buy at a very clear bottom like this. You could probably buy for like less than 8,000 ISK, and then you wait for the right spike to sell for 10, 11, sometimes even 12,000 ISK. It is a unique mineral because it's not tied to Tech 1 production, but to Tech 2 production, which also means that it's a little bit of a unique market to try to invest in and to try to time. And it has actually remained more predictable than any of the other minerals, because these have all been under pressure with all the mining changes that CCP has done to the game in the last few years. Let's move on to PI next at 1630. Like that. And let's see what's happening here. So the broadcast nodes, after dipping well pretty low to the lower end of the chart for short, 2.1 million, is now bouncing back a little bit. So we actually have some volatility that is starting to form on the chart here. 2.3 million now for the sellers, 2,150,000 for the buyers. You can see the high point here, 2.5 million, and a low point of almost 2 million. That's almost a worthy trade. It's unfortunate that it's in the opposite order. You start high, so you would need to sell here, and then you end up low, which is an opportunity to buy. But it's definitely a lesson to remember here. When the chart and the median daily averages come close to 2 million, this might actually be the right time to grab some of these broadcast nodes, because just look at that, going back up in price decently sharply. If this has any more momentum and we could get close to 2.4, 2.5, you know, we've got a small trade here that's actually doable. Next up, we've got the construction blocks having to give back all of the gains that it made in the month of April, and is basically back on the average of around 12,000 ISK, 13,000 for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. So you're still selling at a small premium. It's definitely not the 14,000, 15,000 ISK that we had last month. Consumer electronics next, continuing also on its average, 14,000 to 15,000 ISK at the moment, 14,000 for the sellers, 13,500 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin and nothing too drastic except for this drop here. We are basically at a pretty flat chart. Next up, we've got coolants trying to stay around 9,000 ISK here. 9,200 for the sellers. Okay, that's interesting. Went back up a little bit, and 8,800 for the buyers. So sellers gone up, probably on some immediate demand and a bit of a margin opening up as well. 400 ISK on this price range is actually a decent amount, I think. And we're out of the very low point here for coolants. It's tied to fuel and to fuel consumption, which I would say, yeah, is probably slowly going up as more and more facilities get deployed throughout New Eden. At the moment, there is still a very strong bias towards it's easy to deploy, it's easy to make, doesn't cost too much, and it's actually still pretty difficult, time intensive to try to take out structures at the moment. And which structures would be taken out mostly, in my opinion? It would be inactive ones that don't consume fuel anyways. Next up, we've got enriched uranium tied to fuels. So again, very flat at the current trade range. I think that we can consider this to be the new average, considering the current fuel consumption patterns in New Eden. 11,700 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. Integrity response drones, that is to me a little bit more interesting as well. 2.5 million I would say is the normal average. You can see that we dipped a little bit below that, then a bit above that, and now we are basically coming right back to that average. 2.56 million for the sellers, 2.45 million for the buyers, the average right in between there. So integrity response drones back in the normal trade range, losing volatility as well. This one seems far more stable than broadcast nodes. The mechanical parts next, also trying to go back up, slowly heading for 10,000 ISK. We haven't seen that in a while. 9,700 for the sellers, 9,200 for the buyers. This is an interesting evolution in my opinion when it comes to the PI materials related to fuels. Both mechanical parts and coolants are working their way up slowly. And I would personally say that if you see something close to 10,000 ISK, that we would be in a sell order territory for mechanical parts. That's when you can definitely consider to dump some. And even now 9,700, we haven't been here in quite a while, so I think that this is actually an okay price to start selling at. The nuclear reactors next, after dipping as low as 87,000, these are working their way back up. 99,000 for the sellers, 95,000 for the buyers. So the buy opportunity is gone, but it's also not a sell opportunity just yet. I would love to see us break through that 100,000 ISK mark. That's usually when you see some nice sell opportunities. Robotics staying at around 100,000 ISK as well. Yeah, 102 for the sellers and 95,000 for the buyers. Again, related to fuel production and managing to definitely go back above the bottom. Closer and closer to previous averages from before all of the moon mining changes. Next we have the self-harmonizing power cores, same story as the other advanced PI materials, of course, back on the average, actually losing volatility here as well a little bit. 2.1 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers. For these advanced planetary materials, I have to say that we shouldn't expect too much action until CCP announces something new for another structure, or we see some like massive destruction, a massive burn everything down in Nullsec or something like that, which at the moment is not very likely because structures basically make for a very defensible position. It's really mostly, I think, key structures that get taken out, and everything else, I don't know, either gets destroyed but not immediately rebuilt. So I don't see any massive increase in demand for advanced PI materials on the horizon at the moment. An announcement from CCP or major Nullsec actions might change that, but this also means that for me personally, this is the time to look for these below average prices on the buy order side of things and to try to slowly start to make those investments already in preparation of what we know will be more structures that are coming out eventually for the game. They're still talking very much about an information warfare structure for Nullsec. That could be quite interesting. There's also propaganda towers, there's also the Stargates themselves. So at this point, I really think that, for instance, when the broadcast nodes dip like this, 2 million on the chart, that's when you should look into maybe trying to grab some of those on that low point. Same, of course, then with the self-harmonizing power cores, for instance, which are much more stable, and the integrity response drones. Next up, we've got the superconductors actually dipping when as low as less than 11,000 ISK, so definitely on the lower side of things, but we're heading back for 12k here. Yeah, 11,900 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. We are back around the average. Test cultures next, also still doing strong, but giving some ground at the tail end. Here, 9,500 now for the sellers and 8,700 for the buyers. And then finally, we have the wet bear mainframes, which are also stabilizing towards the 2.25 million mark. So slowly getting back on their average. And here again, if this has enough momentum and we actually break through towards the 2 million on the chart, that's when I do think you want to invest in some of them. We still need to go through quite a few buy orders for that though, but 2.4 million for the sellers and 2.3 million for the buyers. A little bit above average, but not by that much anymore. So PI right now, I think, is in a stabilization phase for a lot of them. And that means, in my opinion, that you can start to look for those buy opportunities. Next up, we're moving at Tech 1 chips at 2410. like that. And let's go over these. As we know now, it's that the minerals are still under pressure mostly, or stabilizing at 1 year low point. Then it's a little bit surprising to see the apocalypse go up to 150 million all of a sudden. So let's take a look at that. 148 million for the sellers, 137 for the buyers. Must be a little bit of purchasing. We are seeing a spike here of 26 units. That's actually considered a spike in volumes for the apocalypse. Unfortunately, that drove the price back up, but basically we can expect that in the next few days more and more supply will plug that gap, and that will be back down pretty soon. The Caracal is I think more of a ship that would indicate trends in the Tech 1 market, because the volumes are at least up to like 250 a day. There's more of them on the market. It's a more popular ship. It's easier to produce as well as a cruiser, and you can clearly see here that we're actually dipping to a 1 year low point. 8.8 million for the sellers, 8.3 million for the buyers. That's probably going to be the impact of, well, the new normal for Zydrine and Megasite. And then you've got Pyrite and Isogen at 1 year low points, and even Mexlon is now dipping back down a little bit. They're just, you know, there just are margins to crumble that price here, and people can produce, still sell for 8.8 million, and still not sell at a loss probably. Next up here we get the Catalyst doing a little bit of a jump up, but already under pressure as well, back down to 1.15 million, less than a million for the buyers, and I think that we will go back towards a million pretty soon. The Drake next also dropping off after staying quite strong for quite a while. 45 million could be considered close to an average for the Drake, but it's unstoppable now. 42.5 million for the sellers, 40.5 million for the buyers, and I hope that that dog is going to stop barking. Next up we've got the Ferox, back to 45 million ISK, so 46 for the sellers and 43 for the buyers. Actually doing decently well, although you can clearly see that in the last few months the chart has been well below average. Next up here we got the Megatron, also a little bit under pressure in the last few months here, although not by too much. The volumes though, look at that, 26, 28 for a very popular PvE ship as well. That's kind of bad. 149 million for the sellers, 138 million for the buyers. Yeah, there's a dog barking out there. I hope you guys don't hear too much of that. Next up we've got the Oracle, 68.5 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers. You can see the lack of demand here. There's just basically 10, 20, maybe 40 Oracles that are on the buy orders. That would include the very worst one that try and pick him up for like 56 million ISK. So you can here again on the chart see how we are under pressure, staying at the low end of the averages or even below average at the moment, and there just isn't enough demand out there to call for stronger prices. Raven also again that slow pressure, heading back for 150, 154 for the sellers, 146 for the buyers. At least there is some demand for the Raven. It is a great battleship overall. So as a result it's actually commanding a little bit of a better price than most other battleships, I think. The Retriever though is showing that the minerals are definitely making Tech 1 ships very cheap at the moment. Again, a 1 year low point, selling for 19.9 million. Buyers are coming in at 18 million. That's really damn cheap for a Retriever. The Tempest, after spiking up to 160 million on some volumes, up to 100 sold in a day, that is of course quite unusual. Thus the market does react in price quite heavily on that, but look at that, back to 140 pretty quickly. 145 million for the sellers, 133 for the buyers. So yeah, a spike like the one for the Apocalypse is probably not meant to last either. The Thrasher continuing its descent as well for 930,000 ISK now for the sellers, 800,000 ISK for the buyers. Really cheap as well. Tornado actually holding on close to average for the entire chart here, but 62.5 million for the Tornado is actually pretty cheap as well. 57 million for the buyers here as well. Yeah, decently close margin, and basically the Tornado is still doing okay. We also see some more volatility and some more volumes at the tail end. I'd say that that's actually very likely to be some nullsec purchasing. You can see that whenever the chart reaches 60 million, that we do jump back up from that, and that's probably on some serious buying. Next up, we've got the Tristan, trying to get back up a little bit, but staying below 500,000. I think, yeah, just below that for the sellers. So probably still going to be back under pressure here. And then the Venture is, man, those are some weird data points for the Venture, but doing okay, actually, you could say, on the 1 year end here. Definitely up in price from like less than 200,000 ISK to 240 for the sellers. And then finally we've got the Vexor that is obviously again moving below the average because of the mineral prices. 9.4 million for the sellers and 8.7 million for the buyers of a Vexor. That is pretty cheap. And overall here, again, I can't scroll on the buyers, so this is it. These are all the buyers of Vexors. It's really not a lot. The Tick 1 market is super cheap because of the minerals and is also very much oversupplied, or I should say oversupplied very quickly on any purchases, just because there's not that much destruction at the moment. And of course also because Nullsec has become much more independent when it comes to the production of their own chips. Next up, we've got the Tech 2 market. That's going to be at 3020. Like that, and let's get started and see what is happening. And this is a little bit unfortunate. I always like the Tech 2 market for speculation, but the Aries, for instance, is staying well above 30 million on the chart and extremely stable here. So selling for 33.8 million, buyers at 29.5 million, and despite the lack of quantities, the chart just isn't going anywhere. So there's, in my opinion, no way that I would risk a buy order on these just yet. It's too stable. It's too high in price, so that's a bit of a nope. Next up, we've got the Cerberus. All right, back down to less than 300 million ISK. You can clearly see that on the 1 year, the 1 year chart. We went from 200 to 300 and to 290 million. Okay, that's a bit of a surprise all of a sudden. Well below 300 million. Okay, so it's 290 for the sellers, 276 for the buyers. I have to say, when Into the Abyss comes out, ships like the Cerberus, ships like the Ishtar, ships like a couple of these other Tech 2 cruisers will be very, very popular there. So do you want to risk an investment? It's a bit of a risky one because we are at this high region already, but there's always a massive amount of people that don't go to CC, that have no idea what's coming, and that will then eventually find out that, yeah, a Tech 2 cruiser is really what I want if I want to run abyssal sites with any kind of security or any kind of assurance that I will make it through without making too many big mistakes. And so as a result here, I think that these cruisers, you know, might see some increased demand yet again, but it's risky to want to do the investment at this high point. Next up here, we've got the Claw spiking up to 40 million ISK here, 39 for the sellers, 36 for the buyers. So at least it's showing that there is some volatility. It's just that it's impossible for me at the moment to say when we are close to a buy order territory. So the Claw, if you can sell some of these, you're probably making some good ISK there. The Crow is staying at that really high price of more than 35 million ISK, yeah, 37 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. So again, you could sell these, but do I want to make an investment there? Nope. Crusader, same thing, staying above 30 million ISK, not much to say. Heretic, very expensive as well at 80 million. You know, here, obviously, I don't think you want to buy, I don't think you want to sell. Next up, we've got the Hound. The Hound is going back down, but only going back down towards 30 million ISK. The big question is, where are the buyers at? 29.5 million. This might turn out to actually be a buy opportunity if you look at the chart, but I would prefer to see the chart below 30 million before I call it. At least this has some momentum, so keeping an eye on the Hound and hope that this will actually break through the 30 million mark is probably our one chance so far to look for an investment, or what looks close to a possible investment. The Ishtar on a pretty big volume spike, going back down to 280 million ISK, 287 for the sellers. Same story. Tech 2 cruiser, strong resistance pattern. You can probably adapt the Ishtar to handle both the tiny little rogue drones in the Abyss, but also the stronger battleships, because you can get some really nice DPS out of the Ishtar, especially if you don't need ropes, you don't need cloaks, you can actually put some guns in the high slots there as well. Enough low slots for some real tank. It can be a very interesting and very good option for the Abyss. So I do think that it might be an investment opportunity, but if you look at this entire 1 year chart, it also does feel to be risky to jump in at this point. Next up here, we get the Manticore. After reaching 45 million ISK, it gives back a little bit of ground, but definitely nowhere near an investment opportunity. Nemesis flat as well in the 30 to 35 million mark. So this was a pronounced buy opportunity. That is personally what I would be looking for at the moment if I would look to make an investment in Take-Two. Pontifex, again, definitely at the high end, dipping below 100 million. Is it really 195 million ISK for a destroyer? Quite expensive, but of course it is a command destroyer we're talking about here. The Purifier staying above 35 million ISK as well, working yet again on a spike. So it turns out now that 31 million was a buy opportunity, just at the very end of April, because now we're out of purifiers and you can basically try to sell them at whatever price you want, but that still feels too risky for me to say that that's where you should pick them up. The only one really that springs out here is the Nemesis at 25 million. That was practically a no-brainer. We should have definitely jumped on that opportunity. But to say that this here was actually a Purifier buy opportunity, I think I'll need a couple more months to keep confirming this, to keep seeing that pattern back before I'll actually be able to really read the Take-Two market again for some investments. But at least there is some volatility. That's good news, I would say, because the Raptor also going back to 40 million ISK. You know, if you can buy them for 30, sell them for 40, you're making a nice bit of profit, and they're in fact selling for 41 million ISK at the moment. The Saber next, yeah, you know, a little bit too flat at the very high end of its range, so that's a big nope. Stiletto, double spike. So here again, you know, it's kind of weird, but it's actually close to 30 million that you have your buy opportunity apparently, because selling for 45, buying for 30, and then selling again for 40 million. It's 38 at the moment, but that is, you know, in very short order. You do have a couple of stiletto trades that you could have done, and on the volume side of things, nothing too crazy, right? It's still 200 a day, something like that, 150 to 200 a day. You can try that for 4 or 5, anything less than 10, I think would have been doable. And it's nice to see that it's live, unlike the Ares, which is crazily flat here. At least the Stiletto shows that there are opportunities in the Take-Two market. What we have to learn is to spot these buy opportunities, and I never felt like this is still above 30 million. That's not a no-brainer for me, but it turns out that this was actually a buy opportunity. The Stork Command Destroyer, of course, staying very high at 100 million ISK. And then finally we get the Tyrannis, which also spikes up here all of a sudden. So it's 32 million though, so that's not sure what happened there. Is all of that really new? Yeah, this is decently new. So here we went 42.9 down to 38, 35, and then very quickly to 33. So it's a very narrow spike here that basically I don't think a lot of people will have been able to take advantage of, and as a result 28 million for the buyers. If you look at the entire chart and we try to get 28 million, that's around here on the chart. It's still not the lowest point either, so yeah, I don't know. At the moment, I'm really not willing to call any buy opportunities outside of really the no-brainers, like a Take-Two frigate reaching 25 million on the chart. And the Hound does look interesting if this pullback has some momentum. Perhaps we can jump below everything that we've seen before here. Let's say 28, 27 million. That's when I'd say call and be willing to pull the trigger. But it turns out that there are already opportunities popping up, like here with the Stiletto. So it's an interesting market. It's still just difficult for me to actually try and trade in it. Next up, we have the Tech 3 market at 38.25. Let's see. Like that, and we'll start with the destroyers as always. Confessor back under pressure a little bit. Basically all the volatility is gone. We are at less than 40 million ISK on the chart. It's 37 for the sellers, 34.7 on the buyer side of things, and as a result it's not crazily oversupplied, but it's just very stable. For the longer term, you know that these ships are very popular in nullsec. This might still be okay to pick a couple of those up, but definitely have the patience for the buy orders in that case. Hecate, same story, as you can tell here, very flat below 40 million ISK bars at 34, which is definitely a pretty cheap price for the Hecate. Don't go crazy with the volumes, but slow investments in these ships for a nullsec war are, I think, a good idea. The Jackdaw going up to 50 million ISK bars at 45 million ISK. The low points unfortunately never got too low on this one, but interesting to see this one go up. One thing to note, of course, is that the volumes aren't in the hundreds, and as a result this is actually possible. You can get some real market forces have an influence on the price, and it's apparently what's happening for the Jackdaw. Some more popularity, not even that much of a volume increase, creating an increase in price here. And then finally we also have this Zwepel that is staying really flat at the low end as well. 35 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. So I'd say that there are still Confessor, Hecate and Zwepel in the situation where they are really cheap. The Jackdaw went back up in price a little bit. I would not be surprised if production would switch from the other three to a bit more Jackdaw production, culling the price in the upcoming weeks. But for the destroyers, they're not crazily oversupplied, but they are definitely mostly at the low end of things. And we know that Confessors, Hecates, Jackdaws are very popular in nullsec, so an investment there might actually be a good idea. But again, wait for the buy orders, don't jump in on those sell orders. Next up we have the cruisers. Here is the Legion slowly trickling down after reaching 200 million ISK, so it's on more supply, but again nothing too crazy. I'm not seeing hundreds of them pop up anymore, so this is going to hopefully help stabilize things, although it does prime them for volatility as well, because when we're talking, let's see, what would this be, maybe 100 legions on the market, it does become manipulatable. Next up here we've got the Loki, after reaching 350 million is finally back down as well on, you know, you've got more sell orders, but nothing too crazy in the volumes either. So selling for 244, buyers are at 226. Next up here we've got the Proteus. After that, Spike has to give back some ground as well. 172 for the sellers, 143. And yeah, I think we can also see this pattern, 85 days, 86 days. And then here now it's more in the last 24 hours that's finally coming in, taking advantage of that increase in price. So in my opinion, there is this reactive nature to the production of these Tech 3 ships, where they will try to plug those gaps, but it takes a little bit of time, and thus we do get some strange motions, especially in the cruiser market. Here we've got the Tengu that went up to 250 million ISK. Sellers are now at 238, buyers at 217. Didn't I see something different? Yeah, it's definitely a pretty sharp spike, and if we look at the volumes though, daily volumes of these ships is like 80, 90, maybe 100, and if you look at what's available on the market, it's not even gonna be 100 chips. So this is definitely something that someone with not even that deep pockets can just buy everything, release them at a price they want. They can try to make ISK that way. I personally feel that it's very risky, because what you will eventually get is, for instance, for the Loki, you will get a lot of new production that comes in like the last 2 days, and then they'll bring in 1, 7, 3, 6, and they'll just continuously bring the price down from your own price range. And how long can you keep buying everything up in order to try and sell them at a premium to all your other purchases? Very difficult to do in my opinion, but I do think that if you look at this Loki chart, if you look at this Tengu chart, and if you look at the Proteus as well and the Legion, that it is actually happening. Someone is making moves in these cruiser markets to try and sell them at that higher price. So very interesting situation, just kind of weird, since in my opinion, especially for PvE, the Tech 3 cruisers do seem to be out of the meta a little bit. Next up, we have the extra product, which is going to be Advanced Moon Materials this week, 43.30. It's been a request in the last couple of weeks. Someone in fact asks, why don't I cover like the moon materials amongst the minerals? Well, it's because it's really a lot of them. So if we go for, Let's see, advanced moon materials. Just these advanced moon materials is already like basically 2 times the size of the mineral market in segments, and then if you go for raw stuff it's gonna be even worse. So there is just too much to cover. It would become like a 2-hour show if I would cover everything. So the advanced moon materials, they're just, you know, amongst the extra products from time to time, and at the moment I'm not too worried about these. I think that there's still like more and more coming online, although that will have slowed down, and we're basically in a more stable period. So if we look at this, I don't expect to see anything too dramatic. If we do though, then that does mean that there is some action happening in the market that could be tradable, because I can't really see any reasons why any of this would make a massive jump. So here, for instance, crystalline carbonite back a little bit above the average from before the moon mining spike, but definitely feels like it's stabilizing and getting close to that previous price, which to me then it makes it a bit of a surprise that we're still paying such a high premium on the Tech 2 ships. Next up here we get fermionic condensates that was holding quite strongly through April at a 1-year high point, is now giving it back a little bit of ground, but is definitely still well above average, which of course would be logical. It would be logical then that the Tech 2 ships would be more expensive if they need the fermionic condensate. So that's quite interesting. Definitely not a recovery for fermionic condensates. These are remaining very expensive. Ferrite carbide, that's a different story though. So you've got again the spike with moon mining changes, and then we are back. We're paying a bit of a premium, but it's from 150 to around 174. So it's not that dramatic, and it's definitely much more stable at the tail end. Ferrogel still at a 1-year high point though, 55,000 ISK. So these are trades. You could do 2 nice trades on a 1-year basis here, 40,000 to 60,000, then back down to less than 40,000, currently selling for 55 or even more. Yeah, 55,000 at the moment. So here, nice cyclical chart that is tradable. Unfortunately, of course, this is probably speculation on moon mining changes, and now here that must be market forces. So there is some hope for some trading here. Fullerite also at a 1-year high point, so I would be selling these and not buying them. Next up we've got the hypersynaptic fibers after reaching a 1-year high point as well, giving back ground. So that's the story at the moment. Nanotransmitters also definitely still on that premium. Non-linear metamaterials, okay, very high as well here at the moment, almost 35,000 ISK. Phenolic composites, same things, actually breaking out right now to more than 2,500 ISK. Interesting, there's a lot of them. I expected more of them to show the crystalline carbonite pattern, but nope, a lot of them are actually at a very high point, 25,000 ISK, and now slowly starting to go down though. So that is interesting to me as well. Plasmonic metamaterials obviously still well above average, but also coming down from a 1-year high point. Ceramic fiber still at a 1-year high point. This is okay, quite interesting. Terahertz metamaterials, 1-year high point, coming down from that. Titanium carbide, more the pattern that I was personally expecting, stabilizing back to a premium from before all of the changes, but not by that much anymore. And I've got tungsten carbide, another 1-year high point. So generally, advanced moon materials, a lot of them are in sell order territory. So if you happen to have some stocks, do I have some old stocks lying around? Maybe. Then you can definitely do so. A couple of them are showing the pattern that I was mostly expecting myself, stabilization and still a premium, but not by too much. And so this is obviously going to be the reason why Tech 2 ships are so expensive at the moment. A lot of these advanced moon materials are at very strong prices. We might want to like check these monthly or something like that, make that a bit more of a regular occurrence, because these are going to be an important barometer for the Tech 2 market itself, of course, and also possibly for what's happening in nullsec. So very interesting, definitely a great suggestion, maybe something that I should look back to a little bit more often than I'm doing at the moment. But the general trend is very expensive advanced moon materials, definitely above average. Many of them at 1 year high points or coming just down from that, and there's just a couple of them that are back on the normal average. Does that mean that you should buy these? Probably not. They're maybe so easy to make that that's the reason why titanium carbide and crystalline carbonate are not at 1 year high points, but many of the others are. And that's going to be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.